All right, all right. Welcome back to another episode of the Rain Race podcast. Hopefully, this is working. We're at the mercy of YouTube right now, who did not want to pick everything up right when it started. And there we go. Now I got confirmation that we're live. Yeah, it's the post Le Mans recap episode. Obviously, coming off another 24-hour race, the second of the month, second of three, sorry, with the Spa 24 coming up in a couple of weeks' time. We've got a 6 Hours of the Glen preview coming at the end of this episode. We've got a lot to talk about. It is a live podcast, of course, so if you want to ask any questions, leave them in the chat box below, and we'll try to get to some of those throughout the episode. Of course, joining me, as always, Stu from Off in the Esses. How are you doing? Post Le Mans, Watkins Glen coming up. Not a bad time to be a sports car racing fan.
I was just going to say it's a beautiful time to be a sports car racing fan. We just had wasn't that long ago, we were talking about Nürburgring as well. We're going to have the Spa 24 coming up. It's, this month may, and you don't have to look that much further back to get into, Indy 500 territory and everything at the end of May. So, this has to be one of the greatest months, maybe ever of sports car racing or just racing in general. I don't know if we've ever had this many iconic events, so close together in such a short period of time. So it's a great time to be a sports car racing fan. And we had some great racing last weekend that I think we're going to talk a little bit about, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah, we got plenty to discuss this episode. Before we do that, though, you have a new show, a new podcast yourself over on your channel, Off in the Esses, giving a bit of a spotlight to some of the IMSA support series. Why don't you tell everybody what you got going on there?
Yeah, so Four Doors and GT4s, and is the name of the show, and I'm doing that with Aaron Pfeiffer. He's a race engineer in the TCR class of the Michelin Pilot Challenge on one of the Brian Herta Autosports Hyundais. They actually won the most recent round at Mid Ohio. So Aaron is of course an ear in the paddock, and wanted to we've been wanting to try and bring more of a spotlight to some of IMSA's support series. So excited to be doing those with him. It's going to be I would say, to compare it to this show, it's going to be less frequent than this show. We're aiming for about once a month or so, or around when the Michelin Pilot Challenge is racing, because that is, I would say, it's safe to say that's IMSA's kind of main support series. So we're going to coordinate it around that. And yeah, we had our first episode last night. It's available on the Off in the Esses YouTube channel, and also wherever you get your podcasts. If you just search for Off in the Esses, it'll show up.
Great. Yeah, definitely recommend checking that out. I checked out the first episode last night. Some great discussion going on there. Like I said, giving some spotlight to some of the lesser known and talked about IMSA support series that maybe we should talk about a little bit more on this show. But
we could be here all night if we start getting into all of the great sports series racing around the world, though.
Yeah, I mean, you had an hour and 15 minutes last night just talking about IMSA support series. So
yep,
we'll try to keep these shows below 2 hours by not talking too much in depth about those. Obviously, I've hinted at enough here. I want to talk about the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I have a full video coming out about this. Hopefully tomorrow. It's in the works. The main takeaway I took from Le Mans this year, and I don't know if you noticed the same, or if anybody watching or listening to this has noticed the same, it just felt different to me. I've been watching that race every year since 2011. I guess even before that, if you talk to my brother, but as far as I can remember, it's been 2011. And it just felt different. I don't know if it was the fact that we had nearly 7 hours of safety car running, or the fact that we had perhaps the most competitive, I would say undisputed, the most competitive top class we've had since I started watching that race. It kind of felt like Daytona 24-ish, though. And there are some good things that come with that, and some not as good things that come with that that we'll be discussing in this episode, and I'll also give more compressed thoughts on that in that video tomorrow. But what do you think? I mean, did you sort of pick up on the same this year?
Yeah, I think I agree with you that there was definitely a different feel around the race this year. Now that you've mentioned more of that sort of Daytona 24-esque feel, I think I kind of agree with you. It had that feeling because, there were so many cars that were on the lead lap, so long into the race. I think there's a point here of 9 cars finishing on the lead lap
Yep.
in hypercar, which that's an insane number. It kind of felt like even as we were getting into the final closing hours of the race, it almost felt like we were halfway through the race. Is how I kind of felt. Just again because so many cars were still in the hunt, and maybe because of the lack of running that we had with those safety cars. And it was definitely a unique feel. There were just having so many cars still in the hunt at the end of it. You're kind of waiting for things to still settle out and unfold a little bit more.
Yeah, that's what it really boiled down to me. Is I'm used to, at least in the overall ranks, waking up because inevitably I'll fall asleep at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning after attempting to stay up all night, and there'll be like 2 cars on the lead lap. Maybe there'll be maybe a minute separating the 2 of them. Even with as competitive as the race was last year, Ferrari had the definite upper hand on Toyota last year, and they were able to stretch out a lead of well over a minute towards the end of the race. Now, we had a great battle in the earlier morning hours, their time. But again, as we got to that 4 or 3 hours left in the race, it started to level out a little bit more to what we would have expected. This year, so many cars were so close at the end of the race. Obviously, it was helped in part by the length and the amount of time that they spent under the safety car procedure over the nighttime hours. That was only one of the factors, though. I think they did a pretty decent job at balancing most of the hypercars for the most part this year. Mm-hmm. And by the time we got to a couple hours left in the race, and I'm trying my best to keep my eyes open, now we're looking at like 4 different cars shuffling the lead every single time they pit. Everybody seemed like they were on a different strategy. So it was a lot more to sort of take in as we got to the later stages of that race.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, there was. I can't recall. I saw sort of a screenshot of the timing screen with, I can't remember if it was 4-ish hours, 3-ish hours to go, and it was the top 4 or 5, the gaps between all the cars was like less than 20 seconds or less than 25 seconds. Not overall, not the blanket time, but like it was a pretty incredible close, in a pretty incredible whole race, but yeah, kind of interrupted by those safety cars, and I know we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yep. Well, let's just talk about it right now. It was such a critical part of the race.
Yeah.
It took up almost a third of the race. 6 hours and 54 minutes were spent under the safety car this year. Only spread across. You would think with that number, there would have been 6 or 7 safety car periods throughout the race. There were only 3.
Yeah.
One of them, the largest one, being in the overnight hours when the rain was ultimately getting too heavy. The visibility was getting pretty low with it being completely dark outside and then having the track completely soaked. I can understand to a point not wanting to let the drivers run under those conditions. I know it was a bit controversial. I know the angle of, okay, these are supposedly the greatest sports car racing, some of the greatest drivers on the planet. You're not really letting them showcase that by running for 5 hours under the safety car. And I can definitely understand that.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest issue I have is I think it took way too long. It took way too long to go back to green. Once the sun started to come up and the light, it was becoming daylight again, the track was clearly drying up. This is the same problem I had last year, actually, where there was rain in one of the earlier stages of the race there, and you had a bunch of cars spinning off, and they threw a safety car. And I thought they took way too long to go back to green in that situation as well. And if you're race control, I can sort of see why you don't want to have every single car bunched up in a pack and then send them green when the track is still pretty wet.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to let these drivers showcase their talent.
Yeah.
And I think it really went an hour and a half too long. One of my favorite parts of the morning hours of that race was Tom Christensen walking into the broadcast booth and just sort of lighting up race control for the lack of willing to go green, telling everybody, these are the best sports car racing drivers we have. The track is there's no real standing water on the track anymore. We should be going green.
Yeah.
And then once they do go green, the second part I have with this safety car issue is it takes way too long once they actually make the decision that we're going to go green to actually get there. We have a 4-stage safety car protocol. You have every car running out in 3 different safety car groups. Purpose of that is to give some cars the opportunity to pit without losing a bunch of the advantage that they would have had. So the 3 safety cars are supposed to be split evenly across thirds of the track. And then they merge all of those cars together under the safety car A, the first safety car. And then they let every single car that is ahead of the overall leader wave around to, or I guess ahead of their respective class leader, wave around to the back of the field. And then they go green. And each one of those stages is a lap on its own. So we should be cutting that down, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Do whatever you can to cut that down. I don't care if it means doing the merging and the wave around on the same lap. You have an 8.5 mile, 13.5 kilometer long track. I think you should have enough time to manage both of those in one single lap under safety car. Cutting a single lap, you're cutting out 8 minutes of safety car running-ish, give or take. And I just think that's something they need to be evaluating more. I don't mind the current system that we have of bunching the cars up more, and I guess some teams would say IMSA-fying the safety car procedure compared to what we used to have. I think it benefits more people nowadays than it hurt with the old system. But we need to make continuous improvements with it, because there's a second year in a row now that I'm saying we've spent way too much time running under the safety car.
Yeah, and I think one of the safety car procedures, or one of the safety car blocks, I think the first one was for damage to the barrier, which is understandable. You know, like that when that barrier was damaged, I think it was around an hour and a half or so, maybe a bit longer than that. Was the first period, but yeah, the barrier was damaged. It was night. You know, it's going to be difficult to complete that repair quickly in the daytime, let alone in the night. You know, makes sense. But yeah, as I don't want to beat the dead horse, I think everybody is kind of thinking the same thing, that, you know, that nighttime rain safety car was unacceptably long. And probably robbed us of maybe another iconic moment coming out of this race. But I guess, to play devil's advocate here, it's kind of you're almost in a bit of a lose-lose scenario, possibly. You know, if you are the body making this decision, if you send them green in these conditions. I mean, we saw what happened under sort of similar-ish conditions last year, although maybe it was during the transition where a lot of the dry to wet transition last year, where a lot of the incidents happened. But, you know, if you have, 4 cars or a number of cars wrecking out under these conditions, then it's also going to raise, questions, and you can't bring those cars back into the race if there is an issue. But, I'm still 100% on team let them race, as long as it's not genuinely dangerous for them or the marshals. Yeah, it was disappointing to lose so much of that race under safety car. But I think to sort of wrap that up on a positive, I think there's still a lot of great things that we're going to look back on this race. And in a couple of years, are we going to remember it for this, this extended full course yellow or this extended safety car period? Perhaps. But we also very well may be remembering this more so for Ferrari winning back-to-back and everything that comes with that.
Yeah. Well, so you sort of tipped on it there. I mean, this was a record number of safety car running we had. I think I already mentioned that. I don't see any scenario where you're going to get that middle of the night safety car with the rain under 3 hours. I just think the track conditions were too unstable. The one thing I will say, and I don't know if you were watching the race when they actually did send it back green or not, but if you were, you would have noticed how quickly the track actually dried up. And I know it was already decently dry by the time they finally sent them back going. But sending the cars out, those hypercars with the massive ground effects, the wet tires, you're still sending 40 something cars around the track at that point, maybe 50 something cars. It dried up within a few laps, really.
Yeah.
So would you have been able to do that maybe an hour earlier? I personally think so, but what are you going to do? You can't really change anything about that now. You're right. There are a lot of positives we want to take out of this race. And I already talked earlier, swapping between Cadillac, Toyota, Ferrari. Porsche wasn't too far off either. Yep. So it really hit a point where it felt like it was going to be anybody's game. You want to mention that, is the race going to be remembered for the safety car lengths? I don't think that's going to be the main talking point. I think this race had a controversial finish for a different reason, mainly between Ferrari and Toyota. And I just want to talk about that a little bit here. I hate when a race ends under controversy, no matter what. It can be big, it can be small. Last year at the Indy 500, and I know this is a sports car racing podcast, bear with me. We were talking about, should IndyCar have just ended the race under the yellow flag? Why did they throw a red flag and then go green for like a one-lap shootout in their biggest race of the season, one of the 3 races of the Triple Crown? It just sort of left a sour taste in everybody's mouths. And there will always be people who looked at Joseph Newgarden's first win there with an asterisk. And unfortunately, because of how competitive the race was at the end of the year this year, we're talking about Le Mans again now, the stakes were extremely high and the cars were extremely close. And there were a couple of different things that got brought up. Number one was the contact between the 51 Ferrari and the number 8 Toyota. Alessandro Pierguidi, and I believe it was Brendan Hartley in the number 8 car at the time, at Mulsanne Corner. And then the other one was the unsafe release, or was it an unsafe release for the number 50 Ferrari on one of the LMP2 cars in the final hour-ish of the race. Both of those things ended up being pretty big talking points after we ended the race. Should the 51 Ferrari have received a penalty greater than 5 seconds added to their next stop? I think yes, probably. But ultimately, that didn't affect the result from the number 50 car. You can't penalize the 50 for something that the 51 car had done. And then the unsafe release. The stewards claim that they have reasoning for why they didn't penalize the 50 on it. The 50 was actually penalized earlier in the race for a similar infraction where they received a 10-second addition to their final pit stop. I think the reasoning was they didn't technically impede the LMP2 car with a second infringement. They just sort of released the car. He didn't try to merge into the fast lane, and the LMP2 car didn't have to react to the 50 car being sent out. So that's why I think he got away with it. But you're still talking about something there that has a lot of stakes, especially when the finish came down to 14 seconds. And I would like to see a little bit more transparency from race control with some of these more weighted calls, where you have something that can genuinely determine the outcome of the race, have the race director, have the stewards go on and say, this is why we didn't penalize this car. Here's our one sentence reasoning for it. And I think that would clear the air up quite a bit.
Yeah, I think I think you can take that and honestly apply it across the board for almost racing in general. Whether we're talking about, the WEC, IMSA, Formula One, maybe NASCAR is the sanctioning body that does arguably the best job of this, but they still come under a lot of fire for a lot of decisions. But just, making sure that the fans especially understand what was the reasoning behind these penalties, because it's difficult for us to look at an incident and see what the difference is between a 5-second penalty and say, or a 30-second penalty, or, a 1-minute penalty. Like, it's difficult for us to look at these, they can look very similar. So yeah, having that additional context would certainly be helpful in lots of these racing series. Another one that you didn't mention that I know has had some discussion around it.
Yep. Go where you're
was
going here.
the number 83. It's still an AF Corsa. Yeah,
Yep.
the 83 AF Corsa. I believe Kubica was
Yep.
behind the wheel, and they had the incident with the number 15 BMW down the Mulsanne when they were trying to get around. I believe it was one of the Manthey Porsches,
Yep.
and there the I know that I believe it was Dries Van Thor was very not happy with the ruling that the stewards handed out for that one. If I'm not mistaken, I think was it a 30-second penalty?
Yeah. 30 seconds stop and hold.
And that was, I believe, the incident that led to one of the full course yellows for the barrier repair.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
so there are plenty of controversial incidents in this one.
So what it has to boil down to is the penalty has to come as a result of the action, not a result of the outcome.
Yep.
I think you need to isolate the fact that this car is battling for the lead and this car is in second. You have to put all of that aside. You have to evaluate these all equally. Doesn't matter if it's for 10th and 11th or if it's for the lead and second. Um, the penalty with the 83 and the 15 BMW, I might be in the minority here, but I don't think that penalty was overly unfit. I think that it was a justified penalty, a 30-second stop and hold. It definitely put the 83 car in the back foot. Of course, they did recover, largely in part due to the safety car rules that they have in place. But I think that was honestly a pretty fair penalty for them. If you look at the onboard from the Manthey car, it wasn't egregious. There have definitely been incidents in sports car racing in the past where I've looked at it and said, okay, that looks a lot more blatant
Yeah.
or avoidable than what we saw there. So I personally didn't take much trouble with that one. The other one, actually, that I thought you were going to mention but took a different turn with was the door on the number 50 Ferrari at the end of the race. And thank you to
Oh,
Mr.
true.
Waffles in the chat for bringing that one up. Because what we saw at Spa with the 99 Proton 963 was Neil Yanni getting a few laps, I believe. Of course, the laps at Spa are significantly shorter than Le Mans, before he was told that he had to either shut the door or bring it into the pits that lap. Nicholas Nielsen got almost a full stint, I believe, in the 50 car before they were told, okay, you have to come in to fix this issue. And the reason why that carried a lot of weight with it is because on the lap he pitted, he was just barely in a window where he could make it to the end with one additional stop after stopping to close the door. So they stopped to close the door, fill the car up with full fuel, full energy, send it on its way. If he saves enough energy over the next stint, 2 stints, he can make to the end on one more stop. And sure enough, that's exactly what they did. If they call him out one lap earlier, that seems very unlikely that he would have been able to do the same thing. If they call him out 2 laps earlier, certainly wouldn't have been able to pull that strategy off, and we'd be talking about a different winner today.
Yep.
So I can see where some people get upset with that as well. But again, we're talking about sports car racing, and how many rulings in sports car racing have taken hours to actually get penalized.
In some cases, months.
Yeah. But even just the in-race penalties taking over an hour sometimes to even get noticed and then called out. It's I guess it's just an unfortunate situation. I don't see that much changing unless you have a complete overhaul in the way we're handling race direction. So to be honest with you, I have some issues with the way the stewarding has been handled in both championships, IMSA and the WEC over the past couple of years. I've definitely been vocal about it in IMSA. I think IMSA is far too lenient a lot of the time, and I think you've shared the same sentiment. So I don't know if we're going to see that much change, but it's been vocalized so much after Le Mans this year that I would have to imagine that they're at least evaluating ways they could become more streamlined with those calls, and then hopefully more transparent as well.
Yeah, I mean, to give them some credit where credit is due, there was a huge talking point. We were all talking about BOP coming out of this race last year, and I think, coming out of the race this year, BOP was not really a big talking point. Is still going to be some discussion of it over the course of the week with some cars, but generally speaking, I don't think anybody's going to complain about the cars from a performance perspective. Seemed to be fairly evenly matched, and it seemed like manufacturers were extracting the pace out of their cars as well. So give the governing body some time to take this back. I'm sure they're going to have plenty of meetings to discuss all of this. It's they're not living under a rock. They're seeing what everybody is saying, and all that we can hope for is that they're going to learn from it and come back and make changes.
Yep. 300% with that. A couple more points I want to touch on here before I move on. We are a bit time constrained with this episode. You're heading to Watkins Glen in the morning, so I'll try to respect that. Alpine, what a race for them to forget. I'm going to be talking about this as one of the main talking points in my post-race recap video. But both cars out of the race before it even hit the 6-hour mark. Both cars retired within 13 laps of each other due to similar issues. With the 35 car, we saw a visual representation of that car's engine going, I quit.
Yep.
Very similar to what we saw with the number 4 Oreca Peugeot 908 back in 2010. Same turn over at Indianapolis. The car started smoking and then stopped in Arnage, and that was the end of the day for that car. About a half hour later, 50 minutes so, car 36, we just saw it pull into the garage and thought maybe they would just be going underneath the car to try to fix some things. And then sure enough, 15, 20 minutes later after that, also hearing that car is retired as well. It's a tough showing from them. I knew going into the race that they were going to have pace, but that reliability was going to be their biggest concern. I didn't expect reliability to be that much of a problem for them.
Yeah.
I certainly would have hoped they would have gotten at least one of the cars past the halfway point of the race. But walking out of Le Mans for them with less time than they would have at any other race on the WEC calendar this year is definitely not a great way to start the 24-hour journey with that A424.
Yeah, it was a very disappointing showing for them. I would have expected. It's always tough to see two cars go out so close to one another, and that hurts so much for a team that is clear that, and a manufacturer that's put so much effort into that car, and the car hasn't looked terribly bad to start the season too. This is obviously a big setback, but then if we want to look on the flip side of the reliability, the flip side of reliability, we have the Lamborghinis, and the Lamborghinis were both able to finish this race. I think both of them finished 2 laps off the leaders. They were kind of in a cluster between them and Peugeot. But Peugeot also, coming out and finishing the race with both of their cars as well. So you kind of see the contrast between those manufacturers, the Alpine that had a horrendous reliability day, but then you have, a couple of other manufacturers that have brand new cars, and very positives coming out of that. Sure, maybe they didn't have the outright pace to go out and win this race, but reliability is a huge first step. And I think that, if you can be reliable in a 24-hour race and learn some things, then you're going to come back faster next year. So negatives and disappointment for one manufacturer, but lots of positives for a couple of others.
Yeah, especially on your first year and first 24-hour race in general, I think finishing it is the number one target. Ferrari was a bit of an oddity last year with not only having the reliability but also the pace to win the race. That's very uncommon for new cars and sports car racing, unless you're in a situation like this year's Rolex 24, for example, where all the cars are new. At that point, it's just a case of who can be the most reliable and have the most pace. I'm sorry, not this year's Rolex 24, last year's Rolex 24. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. There are definitely some winners and some losers of the reliability category. Another big winner, I think, Asada Fraschini.
True.
If you're a small boutique manufacturer like them, the biggest thing you can really do is run a race that's clean, run a race that's reliable, and then hopefully let everybody else around you break down. It's a similar strategy to what Glickenhaus had employed They had a 100% finish rating at Le Mans across the 3 years that they ran the race, with 2 cars each time. So Asada Fraschini, I didn't really see any major issues with that car in the race. Of course, they didn't have the overall pace. They ended up finishing 9 laps down. But just by keeping the car clean and keeping the car out of the garage, they ended up finishing 14th, which is ahead of the 311 Cadillac. By the way, your pick. It's ahead
Oh yeah.
of the 99 Proton Porsche 963. It's ahead of both BMWs, ahead of the 83 Cadillac, ahead of the 83 Ferrari, ahead of the 3 Cadillac, one of the factory Porsche Penske cars, and both Alpines. So for them to walk out of that almost mid-pack on their 24-hour debut, I would say that's nothing but a success for them. And something they can hopefully look at for the future and just extract a little bit more performance out of that car. I know if they're going to be running next year, they're going to need to have a 2-car lineup. So maybe they can pull in some higher rated drivers into that lineup as well. Who knows? Who knows what they could pull off next year?
Learn some more things as this season goes along. Take some learnings and apply them in the form of some improvements to the car. And this could be a car that you see creep up the grid in future seasons.
Yep. So I want to give just quick thoughts to some of the race winners we had. We've talked enough, I think, about the number 50 Ferrari, but the second year in a row, the 499P has taken a victory at Le Mans. Now they're they're sort of taking the crown from Toyota, where everybody was saying Toyota is the team to beat. Now it's all shifting to Ferrari. They're proving last year's win was not a fluke. Mm-hmm. Didn't have the pace in the practice and qualifying sessions this week that they had last year, or at least they weren't quite as strong as they were last year. But the second they hit the ground running in the race, they showed how strong they were in race configuration. They were taking over the lead from Porsche very early on in the race. And I think took a lot of people by surprise with how much performance they were actually able to get out of that car in race conditions. In the LMP2 class, it was the 22 United Autosports team, a team you'll never be able to count out in LMP2. Ollie Jarvis, Bijoy Garg, and Nolan Siegel completing the 4-week turnaround from getting bumped from the Indianapolis 500 and then winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans in the LMP2 class. Really great story for that team and Nolan Siegel in particular, who, by the way, just got confirmed as the driver for the rest of the season in the number 6 Arrow McLaren SP IndyCar today. Go ahead. I guess if you win a race for Zach Brown at Le Mans, he's going to return the favor in IndyCar. And then LMGT3, I was a fool for picking against them. The number 91 Manthey EMA Porsche, Yasser Shaheen, Maurice Schering, and Richard Leitz. I sort of made the pick of the 27 Aston on a whim last week during this podcast. And to give credit to them, they were very strong throughout the race until they had that unfortunate accident with about 4 hours left in the race. But the 91 car, the only team that's going to beat Manthey this year in LMGT3 is Manthey. The BMW won at Imola in the hands of Team WRT, but now that 91 car, 2 wins on the season up against the 1 win that we saw at Qatar from the 92 team. And the 2 of them are starting to run away with the championship at this point.
Yeah, it was a very fun battle in the LMGT3 class to watch overall. There was, lots of cars, coming and going. The 70 Inception Racing McLaren that started on pole looked like it had solid pace as well, but as happens in 24-hour races, there are issues that pop up. Honestly, the thing that stands out to me the most in the LMGT3 class is the Fords. Fords bringing it home in 3rd and 4th. The 2, of course, the 88 and the 44 Proton competition entries. We have yet to see a good showing from Ford, whether it be really stateside or whether that be in the World Endurance Championship. And they really had a good outing here at Le Mans. Those 2 cars There were some issues for the 77, which finished well down the order. But those two entries were strong and definitely deserving of a podium, and then another. Essentially, they deserve their third and fourth place finishes, and kind of hammers home that maybe Ford and Proton competition are starting to figure out that Mustang a little bit more.
And I knew they would at some point. It's just very telling that they were able to make it 24 hours at Le Mans without any major reliability issues. So hopefully this is the start of a positive turn for them. Still seeking that first win, whether it be in IMSA or the World Endurance Championship. But after the result we saw for them there, I wouldn't say it's out of reach for them for the rest of the season in either championship. Of course, Multimatic fronting the Ford effort over in IMSA. Going over the points just real quick after Le Mans. Of course, this is a double points race. It is the number 6 Porsche Penske Motorsport 963 still holding off the lead. Although jumping up the order, unsurprisingly, it was the number 50 Ferrari. They now sit only 9 points back on the 6 Porsche. And in third place, still holding pretty consistent throughout the season, it was the number 7 Toyota, only 8 points behind the 50 Ferrari. So doing the math quickly, 17 points, spreading the top 3 in that class. So looks like we're starting to get a bit of a championship fight on our hands here. And I don't see anybody who really got excluded from the championship hunt after this race quite like we did last year with the number 7 car. The number 5 Porsche is down the order a little bit. They're only at 56 points. But still, if they can string a couple of good races down here, they might be able to find themselves closer to the championship hunt as well. And of course, no championship to go over in the LMP2 class. But I do want to go over the LMGT3 class really quick. I talked as one of my predictions last week about how I thought, I just had a gut instinct, that one of the 2 championship leaders was going to take a big hit at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And sure enough, we saw that for the number 92 Manthey Pure Racing Porsche 911, who's now sitting at the top of the timesheets, tied with the sister number 91 Manthey EMA car. Talked about how it looks like they're trying to run away with the championship, although only 2 points back from the pair of them is the 31 Team WRT BMW, who ultimately could have gotten a few more points out of Le Mans this year. They finished second, actually. So I was thinking about the 46 car. So the 31 is still capitalizing on the best finish that they could have gotten, and pulling 36 points out of the Le Mans race weekend. So only 2 points back on that Porsche pair. And then third place, way further down with 42 points, is the 777 D Station Racing Aston Martin, who finished in 4th place at Le Mans. Couple closing thoughts on this topic. Sam Kegel in the chat saying, I wish Peugeot was a bit stronger this race. I think a lot of people are going to agree with that. They turned a lot more heads last year at Le Mans than they did this year, for sure. But you already mentioned, Stu, how reliable they were over the course of the 24-hour race. They didn't have some of those reliability issues they had last year.
Yep.
And I'm hoping that as they start to learn more about that Evolution car, they can find a bit more pace in the second half of the season, and perhaps we see them back on the podium and fighting for race wins as we get towards the latter races of the championship this year. Going over some of the news we got, though. Finally want to move things on.
Oh, yes.
We had the ACO press conference last week on Friday, one day after last week's podcast, discussing some of the things both with the WEC, but also some IMSA tie-ins there as well. First thing I want to discuss here is the 2025 WEC schedule. Not a whole lot to talk about because it's the same tracks in the same order that we've had this year. I know a lot of people are expecting Monza to come back and replace Imola after the renovation work was done at Monza. I myself was expecting that as well. From what I had heard, the organizers at Imola were a lot easier to work with than Monza. So they got the contract extension. I think that contract goes through or until 2028. I can't remember which one it was, but they'll be continuing at Imola into the future at this point. There were some questions asked about whether or not we would see that expansion to a ninth race on the calendar, maybe in 2026. Seems like the answer to that's going to be no. Although potentially, maybe we see that ninth race added in the 2027 season. I'm personally okay with that. I think right now what you have is a championship with plenty of manufacturers, plenty of teams in there. In fact, capacity grid. All you can really ask for is stability. And I think we're seeing the
Yes.
same thing out of IMSA right now, where they have the championship that they really want. Now they're just holding on for stability. They don't want to take any major risks and make changes to the calendar that would impact some of the smaller teams on the grid. So I guess I'm not too surprised about that. And I think that the 8 races that we have right now suits the championship pretty well, although I'm certainly not going to object to that ninth race in the future.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. You know, we've talked about in previous episodes how sports car racing can kind of go on one of these roller coasters of, you know, we have a ton of manufacturers, we have no manufacturers, everything's going great. You know, we're seriously questioning, you know, whether our class is going to be around in a couple of seasons. I think having the stability that you mentioned is, you know, is a very good thing. And not trying to bite off more than you can chew, because who knows, we could see in a couple of years, well, we'll talk about one of the other news topics in just a second, but we could see in a couple of years, if you see a couple manufacturers dip out, then all of a sudden, and you're running an additional race that's more money, more budget, then it could deter new manufacturers to come in and sort of fill some of those shoes. So keeping with the status quo, there's it's going to be hard to complain about that, I think.
Yep. We do have some clashes, though, unfortunately, that we need to discuss. I noticed you were particularly, I guess I'll say, upset about this, given how early IMSA put their schedule out this year. Going off trends from recent years, the IMSA schedule is not even supposed to be out this year, but they sort of surprised everybody by dropping it the day before the 12 Hours of Sebring this year. In an effort to avoid some of these clashes, sure enough, we have once again the 6 Hours of Spa clashing with the Multool Course de Monterrey at Laguna Seca for the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship, as it did this year. And then we also have the 6 Hours of Sao Paulo clashing with your home race, the IMSA, I don't know the official name of it, but the IMSA
I think it's the
WeatherTech
Chevrolet Grand Prix, I think.
There you go. At Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, Mosport, as some people would know it as. And then at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, I think a big talking point coming out of the race this year is the clash that it has with the Canadian Grand Prix next year for Formula One, but also the IndyCar race at Gateway. With F1, to be honest with you, it was sort of one of those things where it's like, it's not great, but I don't think it affects really anything, to be honest with you. I don't
Nice
think
to see some of the drivers there supporting some of their fellow manufacturer drivers. Yeah.
Right, but I don't expect we would have probably seen any F1 drivers on the grid next year anyways. It seems like, with the exception of Nico Hulkenberg in 2015 and Alonso in 2018, if you are running in Formula One, teams are not going to want you to run in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. So I've accepted that for now. IndyCar, on the other hand, we did have quite a few IndyCar drivers racing in the 24 hours this year. Of course, Nolan Siegel, we talked about winning that LMP2 class. And a lot of those drivers are going to now have to pick and choose as it stands right now with that clash with Gateway next year. I would hope that IndyCar would be able to work with Fox, their new TV provider, to see if maybe they can bump that race forward or maybe backward a week. I don't know off the top of my head what the IndyCar schedule looks like. But it seems like that's going to be a tough ask in itself. And I know Alex Palou in particular, who, might I add, I think my driver of the race for the 24 Hours of Le Mans this year, how strong he was in the number 2 Cadillac, seemed pretty upset that that race is actually clashing with IndyCar next year.
Yeah, and understandably so. I mean, you have some of the best drivers in the world competing in in IndyCar, and if you're not, they're not even going to get the. And this isn't quite the same as the F1 conflict in my eyes, just because we see a lot more IndyCar drivers coming to contest this race.
Yep.
You know, it wasn't just Palou. We had Grosjean. You mentioned Segal, who is now an IndyCar driver. You know, he was an Indy Next driver, I guess, at the time. But I don't know if I can't recall if missing anybody else that came over.
Rasmussen,
Yeah.
Dixon,
Did Dixon race that? Yeah, Dixon
yeah,
was
in the
there this
three
year. Okay.
car. And
So
there's one other I'm forgetting, I think.
that's a solid handful of drivers here that are all of a sudden ruled out from being able to participate. So disappointing to see. Like you said, hopefully there's still plenty of time to sort this out, although not much time, because you know track schedules and broadcasting schedules need to be in order. But you know, hopefully they can sort something out, because it would be a shame if we're not able to get a lot of those IndyCar guys on the grid next year.
Yep. Kiffin Simpson. Thank you, Melvin, for
Yes.
that one. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this for the next hour if I wanted to. We'll have to see if they make any changes on that front. I'm not entirely optimistic, to be honest with you, but we'll see how that shakes up going into the 2025 seasons.
Yeah, I just want to. I can't talk about this without quickly touching on the conflicts with the IMSA schedule. The
Yeah,
the real problem that I have with all of this is that this was supposed to be an era of convergence between these two bodies. You
yep,
know, yeah, conflicts are going to happen sometimes, but these are the exact same conflicts that we're having this year. And I get it, you know, CTMP, you know, GTP isn't going to be there anyways. The hypercars aren't going to be there anyways. That one, okay, whatever. But you know, Spa clashing with Laguna Seca, to add in. I know it's not IMSA and WEC for this one, but the IndyCar conflict. You know, it it is disappointing. There's a lot of races. I know there's going to be conflicts no matter what you do, but you know, I really do wish that IMSA and the WEC would have could have done more. I know I'm making this sound a lot easier than it probably is, but I just wish that there was some way that they could have figured out to reduce some of these conflicts, because you know it's going to make it that much more difficult for us to see drivers running in both championships going forward, and that kind of sucks.
yeah. Well, because at that point, what is the purpose of IMSA dropping their calendar months
Yeah,
before they usually do?
yeah,
Like I said, that came as a surprise to everybody this year, I think, dropping that
yeah.
in March. So I don't really know what other purpose that serves, being the first one out with your 2025 season. But who knows? I agree with everything you said there. I mean, in an era of convergence where a lot of these drivers have crossover between both championships
And teams.
and teams as well.
Not that it's the same team personnel that are, you know,
Right.
running both these cars, but still you have Penske that guy that's split on either end of the world,
Yep.
you know, for these conflicting races. So
Well, Penske doing the double at at Spa and then flying to Laguna Seca the next day. So
yeah,
that
yeah.
was a little impressive, I'll say. All right, I want to move things on. I want to talk about. I'm not going to get mad in this episode because I already have in previous episodes, but the minimum two-car mandate for the hypercar manufacturers was confirmed last Friday. What this means essentially is if you're a hypercar manufacturer, you just need to have a minimum of two cars on the grid. Doesn't matter which teams run them, I don't think. So if you're, say, a Sata Fraschini and you want to run one car under Duquesne and then you sell another car to another team, I'm pretty sure nothing's stopping you from doing that. But this is really just to align the championship more as a manufacturer-focused championship with a manufacturer point system that they can really weigh on, where they can use both cars counting towards that manufacturer's trophy. I've already given my 5 cents on it, my 2 cents on it. I think it hurts a lot of the boutique manufacturers, and I disagree with that. Just on the grounds of if you have a manufacturer, no matter how big or how small, that is willing to build a car to your rule set that is not running in any other championship apart from IMSA, and IMSA will not allow boutique manufacturers anyways, you just need to accommodate them. That's my personal viewpoint on it. I will not change that, but alas, here we are. The other side of it, though, is we will have the full season grid bumped up to 40 cars next year from the 37 that we saw this year. I did hear on the World Feed broadcast that all of the full season hypercar manufacturers we have on the grid this year are expected to return in 2025. I don't know if that was a little bit of me reading between the lines on that one. It sounded like that was the impression that they were trying to provide. Of course, we'll be losing Chip Ganassi Racing from the Cadillac side. It sounds like they're going to be replaced by Jota. So losing two of the Jota Porsche 963s in favor of two Cadillacs. By that remark, it would sound like we're going to have two Assetto Fraschini's on the grid as well. I know Vanwall was planning on coming back with a hypercar, with a sort of an evolution of their existing hypercar for next year, switching to a Pipo Motors V8 that we saw in the Glickenhaus for previous seasons. I don't know where that program really stands. I guess that's going to be one of the questions moving into the off season. But if you have a 22-car hypercar grid and an 18-car LMGT3 class, I would have to do the math in a future episode to see where that leaves everybody. But we'll have to see if somebody ends up getting the boot on that, whether it's in the hypercar category or in the LMGT3 class. And then the main confirmation we got out of all of this, though, and one of the questions that we had going into this 2-car mandate was, where does that leave Aston Martin with the Valkyrie program? Can the Heart of Racing afford to do a 2-car program in the World Endurance Championship while also running a full season in IMSA? And the good news is that it sounds like they will be able to do that. They did confirm a 2-car program for the WEC next year. They're expecting to run 1 car in the full IMSA season from what I had heard, which is great news. I think that car is going to be a huge fan favorite. V12 hypercar on the grid. I noticed in your videos too, where you're talking about the cars we'll be seeing in IMSA next year. You mentioned maybe they don't end up actually running that V12 in the race car. From everything I have heard, it will be that naturally aspirated V12. So that alone is going to be one of the fan favorites, and very much looking forward to seeing that car in both championships next year, and very glad that the Heart of Racing was able to step up and make that accommodation for both championships next year as well.
Yeah, it's going to be it is going to be great to see, both of the two Aston Martins on the WEC grid, even if it's just the single one on the IMSA grid. I don't think anybody's going to complain too much about that. Just seeing that program finally get off the ground and get on the grid is a huge plus. And I think, based on one of the other pieces of news that we heard come out, hopefully this might open the door for another manufacturer or two that's been kind of on the fence to shove their name in the ring. Because another thing that was announced in this press conference was that the current hypercar and GTP homologation has been extended through the 2029 season. So, at the end of the day, what does that mean for us? It means that we're going to see the hypercars and the LMDH cars on the grid in both IMSA and the WEC. IMSA also released an announcement about this as well. So we're going to see the hypercars and LMDHs on those respective grids through at least the 2029 season. And what else does this sort of open up? Well, maybe you get a manufacturer like a McLaren that's been kind of on the fence and, maybe a little bit questioning, do I want to put forward all this effort and all this money to build a car that's only confirmed to be on the grid for a couple more seasons? Like, having the full 5 years into the future that we know this car is going to be around for now, that maybe can be a nudge for one of those manufacturers that's sitting on the fence.
Absolutely. And I think that was one of the negatives with the prior DPI regulations is seemingly 2 years into that new rule set, they were talking about the next evolution of the DPI category. And of course, that's now what we know as the GTP class. We were talking 10 minutes ago about stability in the championships. I think this is a great move to
Yeah.
ensure that stability. Um, no major changes going into the next 5 years. So having another 5 full seasons of those cars in both championships, again, maybe a manufacturer here or there drops out somewhere in there. Maybe we get a couple of manufacturers joining, but overall, for that to be extended for an additional 5 years after the 2024 season elapses, good for us as sports car racing content creators, I guess, but
Yeah.
also great for fans as well.
Now, did they mention anything about the hydrogen regulations
They
in this at all?
they did. It's been pushed back an additional year.
Okay.
Um, to be honest with you, I've lost track of what year we're on now. I don't know if that's 2028 or 2029 as well. But it also would not surprise me if it gets pushed back again. Just considering how often they've or how many times they've pushed that implementation back already. The other thing they've pushed back that was announced at the press conference, and good news, I guess, if you're an LMDH manufacturer, is
True.
your chassis is now is now bespoke. Um, as it was announced that the next generation of LMP2 cars has been pushed back another 2 years at minimum to 2028. Will be over 10 years with the current spec of LMP2 cars at this rate. Um, as it was reported, it's a completely new rule set for the class. What we had confirmed previously were the same four manufacturers, the Oricas, Dalars, Ligier, and Multimatics of the world, paired up with a Gibson V8, similar to what we saw with the current spec of LMP2 regulations. Of course, those sort of became the backbone of the new LMDH cars that we're seeing in IMSA and the WEC. And now it sounds like that's completely scrapped. So again, if you're an LMDH manufacturer, congratulations, you now have a bespoke chassis. Um, from what we heard from the press conference, it sounds like the reasoning for this was due to some comments that were made from some of the European Le Mans, Asian Le Mans Series teams, where LMP2 is really in the spotlight over there. It's the top class of prototypes that they're running there. They are not running the restricted prototypes in the European Le Mans Series that we're seeing in IMSA and the WEC. I mean, I don't really swing either way on this one. If this benefits the smaller teams, which of course LMP2 is really all about,
Yeah.
then I'm not going to be opposed to it. At the same time, there's a clear favorite when it comes to the current regulation of LMP2 cars being Orica, and to have another, what would this be, 25, 26, 27, 3 more years of, I guess, Formula Orica, if we want to make the joke,
Yeah.
in global sports car racing, whether it's WEC or IMSA or European or Asian Le Mans Series. Not ideal, I would say, but what are you going to do?
I mean, it could be worse. It could be worse. There were concerns that with the new LMP2 regulations that were coming, that the popularity of the class may dip a little bit, as other forms of as other classes have taken big steps forward. I mean, we see the explosion of the LMH class, for instance. What there would probably be a pretty big price gap between those two, but I think again it kind of seems to be becoming the theme of what we've been talking about with a lot of these decisions, is just stability, or with these announcements has been stability, keeping the LMP2 cars as they are, sort of maintaining the status quo there, and then hopefully they don't. I mean, you can only push this back for so long before you start going, okay, you guys really got to figure this out. So 2028, figure it out. I think I heard, were there discussions of, I mean, on the engine, on the powertrain side of it, potentially being hybrids
Yeah,
utilized
I had
in
heard
that.
that.
But
Listen, keep the cost low.
yeah, that's
If nothing
exactly
else,
it.
keep the cost low. We don't
Yeah.
need to drive up the cost and drive out some of these teams that are already representing those classes.
Yep.
Because, how many times am I going to say at some point when we have the downfall of the hypercar GTP regulations,
Yep.
are we going to be looking at the LMP2 class as sort of the class that we want to focus on again at Le Mans? So they're definitely going to have to sort things out. I hope this is the last time it's pushed back. Again, as you said, for now, I'm okay with it on the grounds of stability. It sounds like the next set of regulations that we get, there's very few details about it right now, although it sounds like they want the cars to have less power than they have right now, but also be lighter than they are right now. I don't know exactly what that means for target lap times compared to what those cars are running. As it stands, I would imagine probably a little bit slower, as even though they've been slowed down significantly, they're still not too far off what we're seeing from the LMDH slash hypercars.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I know, I think we've seen a lot of really good LMP2 racing the past, well, handful number of years, and, keep giving us some more of that for the next few years. And I don't think anybody's going to be looking at the fact that it's a spec Orica class and that it's almost 10 years old.
Yep. Do you think, we just got a comment in the chat, do you think LMP2 will outlive LMDH? As a class, yes. As a current set of regulations, I hope not, because that would involve us pushing that current regulation set out an additional 2 years, I guess.
Well, I guess the LMP2, yeah, the class, the spec of car could still exist, but hopefully this generation doesn't outlast, the LMDHs.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that with this announcement of the additional 5 seasons of Hypercar GTP, that we're not talking about the downfall of that class anytime soon. Hopefully the manufacturers are looking at that very enthusiastically. So, talking a lot about the World Endurance Championship in this episode, but we're back in the swing with IMSA nowadays. We're going into the summer of IMSA, I guess I'll call it. Starting things out
Summer of Mazda from a few years ago.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, when was it Mazda when they won the 6 Hours of the Glen, I think, was their
19.
first win that summer. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and then picking up a few more wins that year as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just call it the summer of IMSA. I don't know who's going to be on top in these races. And oops, I forgot to do predictions again before this episode. But
we can do them on the fly.
We'll
it worked out well for you last time.
It didn't work out
better than me.
It worked out better than you, but we'll see. We do have some notes, though. It's the third endurance race of the year for the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship, the first of 2 6-hour races. And we're going to the hilly lakeside, very warm, it seems, and potentially another rain race. Hey, look at that. At the 6 Hours of the Glen. And you'll be there, seemingly no matter what, and I'm still on the fence about it, depending on how hot and rainy it may be. So why don't you lead things off here and talking about the Glen?
Yeah, I'll be there, either cooking or being soaked. So I'll be there regardless. If you're gonna be there, then let me know. Anybody that's listening, be more than happy to say hi. But we are heading to, again, beautiful upstate New York and Watkins Glen. Really, in my opinion, one of, if not the most iconic road course in North America. When you think of everything that this facility has hosted over the years, whether it be F1, IndyCar, IMSA for forever, Can-Am, Trans Am, there's so many great racing series that have raced at this track, and so many iconic moments that we've seen here at Watkins Glen for this summer classic. It is an absolutely packed grid once again. 56 cars are going to be on the grid, which is actually one shy of the record number that we saw here last year, but still 11 GTPs, 13 LMP2s, 11 GTD pros, and then 21 GTD entries. So, when you're hearing grid numbers like that, traffic is going to be a big issue. We saw traffic determine and decide who won on track here last year, as it would turn out. One car would not make it through inspection, and the 25 BMW therefore inherited the victory. But yeah, this is probably one of my, if not my favorite track that's on the IMSA schedule, which is I think kind of says a lot when you do have so many iconic tracks on the grid. We're sure to see some great racing. As you alluded to, weather is going to be a huge factor this weekend. We are essentially, as we're recording this, less than 2 days from on-track action beginning. And I don't think anybody can predict what the weather is going to be like on Thursday. Never mind what it's going to be like on the weekend. It seems to change all the time. We could be absolutely cooking there, and it be very sunny, or we could have rain roll through and have some severe storms as impacts the on-track action, as we've seen in recent years. So it's going to be another great race. It's going to be shorter than the 24-hour race that many of you were that we were all watching this past weekend. But there's still going to be no shortage of action. And we were just talking about those LMP2 cars. It's the first time that they're going to be back on the grid since the 12 hours of Sebring stateside. So that's going to bring plenty of fun storylines, I think, to follow along with. Chris, you were talking about maybe you'll go to Watkins Glen, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll just sit on your comfortable couch and take this one in. But is there anything in particular that you're looking forward to with this year's race?
I'm just looking forward to another endurance race. I'm looking forward to seeing the Lamborghini back on the grid. We talked about them earlier in the show, and how reliable they were at Le Mans this year. I'm excited to see if they're able to turn that reliability into some strong pace as well. So far across both championships, we haven't seen a whole lot out of that car. Of course, it's only raced at Sebring in IMSA so far, but they'll have that two driver lineup of Matteo Cairoli and Andrea Caldarelli in car 63. Notably, only that one car at Watkins Glen this weekend compared to the two that we had at Le Mans this past weekend. But in general, there's just a lot to look at. BMW was pretty strong here last year. They picked up the official win after the winning Porsche 963 from Penske was disqualified post-race. I'm curious to see if they can repeat that. They've had a very disappointing season so far, to say the least. And we talked about how cursed the number 10 car was, the number 10 WTR Andretti Acura was for a long time. They finally got that weight off their chest at Detroit. We've talked this season about how cursed the number 31 Wheel Engineering Cadillac is. They'll be fighting for the win here at Watkins Glen. And then, of course, BMW as well. They seem to have a chip on their shoulder that they need to brush off. I just think there's a lot of storylines in that GTP class alone in this race. Not even mentioning, like you said, we have LMP2 returning for the first time since Sebring. We have a stacked lineup of GTD Pro and GTD cars as well. It'll be a great race. And you said we're down one car from last year, but we're also down a whole class from last year as well. So still across the board, better strength in numbers, I think, than we saw previously.
Yeah, every class has an increase in grid size from where we were at this race last year. 4 more cars in LMP2, which was actually a bit of a surprise to me. But yeah, maybe everybody always loves to complain about the LMP3 cars and some of the incidents that they've caused. But I would probably argue that we have not seen a decrease in the number of full course yellows this year compared to previous years when the LMP3s were on the grid. So if that stays true and we still see a bunch of incidents, then as we've seen in this race in previous years, then it certainly will be an interesting one to settle in for and watch.
Yeah, there were definitely some controversies last year in the LMP3
Yeah.
class, but as I've said, it's not a car issue, it's a driver issue. So,
Hmm.
um, we'll see. I'm hoping everybody can keep it as clean as possible. I'm hoping there's no major upsets in any of the classes. But this being a very fast, sweeping track with a lot of blind turns as well, it
Yeah.
generally leads itself to disappointing outcomes for some of the teams on the grid. So I wouldn't be shocked if we have some team walk out of here with a big points deficit than they had going in.
Yeah, the points the championship standings are in an interesting state for a couple of these classes already. So yeah, if you start seeing some more, if we start seeing more things trending the way that they have been, then yeah, you could be starting to talk about championships not being wrapped up by any means, but having a car that is well in control of them.
Yep. Are we gonna do this live? Are we gonna just make
Oh
our
yeah,
picks since it works?
that's exactly what I was gonna ask.
I
I
brought
was.
it up. You know what? I'll start then.
Oh, all right.
What did I say before Detroit? I said I'm just going to keep picking the 31 until they win. I'm going to keep picking the 31 until they win.
Man.
Uh,
Yeah,
Wheeling
that's why you
Engineering,
wanted to go first.
Wheeling Engineering, Action Express Cadillac. They've got Tom Blomqvist back in the car this year. One of the few cars in the actually is it the only car in the GTP class that has a 3-car driver lineup? I think no, I'm sorry, the 85 JDC Porsche also has that 3 driver lineup. But getting Tom back in the car, obviously an extremely talented driver in a GTP prototype. Wish he was on the grid at Le Mans, but I think he's going to lead that team to some great things here. So I'm just going to pick him again. Why not?
Yeah, that was my pick. Was the 31, but let me go with I'll change it up for the sake of being interesting. Give me the 25 to go back to back the BMW and pick back to back at Watkins Glen and pick up their first podium of the season. They've shown some strong pace this year. They just have not had things go their way, and some driver errors have also played into that pretty significantly. But yeah, give me the 25 BMW in this one.
All right, fixes in. If you're not the 31 or the 25, congrats on the win.
Yeah,
In the
especially
LMP2,
yeah.
LMP2, can I bet against the 18 car?
Oh,
With 2
fair.
wins on
Yeah.
the trot, can I bet against Connor Zilic, who was gracious enough to come on this podcast back in January?
He's done a lot of winning since he came on this show, so
He has.
I think he
I like
might
to
owe it
think
to.
it's
He might
because
owe
of
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to bet against them, but I guess in the spirit of being brave, I guess I'll do it anyways, just to open the door for you to pick them, I suppose. I like the number 99 AO Racing Orca
Oh.
here. They got a great driver lineup. Paul Chatan was the standout driver for Alpine this past week at Le Mans, both in qualifying, but also I think he had the fastest. No, I don't want to say that. I don't know if he had the fastest lap in the race in the 35 car. And Matthew Brown closing out that 3-driver lineup in that car. I think if anybody's going to take the fight to the 18, it'll be them this year.
All right. Well, it's basically a foregone conclusion at this point that the 18 is going to win this race because I'm not going to pick them.
Okay.
I am picking the number 74 Riley Motorsports entry. That is of Gar Robinson, Josh Burden, and Felipe Fraga. They won this race last year. In fact, Gar Robinson and I believe Felipe Fraga has been his co-driver for all of these races. They have won this race 3 years in a row. All those 3 previous races were in the LMP3 class, but I liked what they've shown in the jump up to LMP2 in the first 2 races of the season at Daytona and at Sebring. They currently find themselves second in the championship standings, so they have the results to sort of back up how they've looked. I think that they can keep that winning streak going here at Watkins Glen.
Yep. Fair enough. Congrats, 18 on the win.
Yep.
GTD Pro, give me the 62 Risi Ferrari. Ferrari can go back to back in winning endurance races, albeit in different classes. Daniel Serra and Davide Rigon in that car. They are only running in the Michelin Endurance Cup this year, but I think every time they show up on the grid, they're definitely a strong contender. I was actually looking at the FAF Racing McLaren as well as a potential car I would have picked, but let's just go for the 62 for sake that they're an endurance-only team.
I like it. I like it. They've been strong in the races that they have run, but they're not going to win this race because I think it's going to be the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW, one of the strongest cars across the IMSA grid last year, a dominating effort in the GTD class that they put forward. They haven't quite had the results that they've been looking for in the jump up to GTD Pro yet, but I think Brian Sellers, Madison Snow, and Neil Verhagen can pick up their first win in the GTD Pro class at a track that has been pretty good to that BMW M4 GT3. I think they were in the running there. No, this was still when they had the M Team RLL BMWs a couple years ago. They were in the running at the Glen until late in the running. But regardless, I think that car suits the Glen well, and I think this is a strong team that's getting close to a win in this GTD Pro class.
Yep. And then GTD, I guess just because I was so impressed with their raw pace at Le Mans. Let's say the 70 Inception Racing McLaren. Why not? Ooh. Brendan Arieb, Frederick Schandorf, and Ollie Milroy in that car. Obviously didn't have Le Mans end the way they would have wanted this year, but they definitely had the pace to make something happen. And we're working with a completely different championship here, a completely different balance of performance set. But why not? In the spirit of Le Mans, I suppose.
I like that pick. That was one that hadn't crossed my mind, but as soon as you said it, they had some strong runs last year. You mentioned that they have the momentum coming off of some really good pace at Le Mans. So I think they'll definitely be a force to be reckoned with here this weekend. I am going to, I guess I'm kind of forming a bit of a theme here. Actually, this is definitely a trend. I'm going to go with last year's winner, the number 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus of Frankie Montecalvo, Parker Thompson, and Aaron Tielitz. They haven't gotten to victory lane in GTD yet this year. That car, the number 12 car, hasn't got to victory lane. The number 89 did win at Long Beach. But I think that number 12 car, again, a really strong lineup in a really competitive class. But that Lexus has looked really good at the Glen in recent years. And I don't see a reason why that wouldn't be the case once again this year. Give me the number 12 Lexus.
I'll take it. Don't bet against Lexus, I guess.
That's
it's
true.
Usually a pretty good strategy. Where can I watch the 6 Hours of the Glen? Is one of the messages we got in the chat. If you are international, i.e. anywhere that's not the United States, it will be on IMSA TV. I don't know if it's been officially confirmed that they're streaming it on YouTube again.
It will be.
Okay, there you go.
Yep.
So either IMSA.tv or IMSA's YouTube channel will have it. If you are in the U.S., the finish of the race will be on USA Network.
I think the start. I think the first 3 hours are on USA. And then there's nowhere to watch the end. I think that's what I saw.
I know the full race is on Peacock. If you want the short answer, full race on Peacock.
Check your local listings.
Check your local listings. I thought the end of the race was on USA Network, but I do know that they're not airing the entire race on USA. So Peacock, if you want to watch the entire thing. I hear you typing away at that.
Yeah, it is the first 3 hours on USA, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Step it up, NBC. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, well, they have to work around their NASCAR schedule now. So
yeah, and the Olympics coming up as well. So
true.
Got some U.S. Olympic trials going on. Any concern about the new curbs at the bus stop chicane? I'm gonna let you lead with this one. I think you've talked about this before.
Yeah, a little bit. I don't think we'll know. Probably we'll have an idea maybe around this time tomorrow. Depending on what we see, if drivers post anything from the track walk, or if any images emerge from a track walk. Otherwise, it'll probably be on Thursday when we see what the layout of those turtle curbs are going to be. drivers have, especially prototype drivers, have been plenty vocal about them when the images emerged earlier this year. So yeah, a little bit concerned for what that could look like. But on the other hand, I am confident that the track and IMSA would have worked together for a safe configuration there, that we're not going to see, hypercars take GTP cars take flight in this race.
Yeah, well, the strategy previously was just get as close to that wall on the right hand side as you can and just sort of launch over the curb, which now
Yes.
obviously we're not going to be doing that. I'm curious how that affects the lap
Oh.
times, especially going into qualifying. Um, for the race, I wouldn't imagine it being any major issue, to be honest with you. I think the drivers are just going to have to change the way they take that turn, and they'll probably pick up on it pretty quickly, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine it's going to slow the cars down at least a little bit from what we've seen in previous years.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm kind of interested in as well is if it does impact how the drivers enter that corner, because as you mentioned, they were taking that curb very, very aggressively in recent years. So, if it does affect their corner entry at all, does it open the door to potentially some more overtakes heading into the corner? It's a pretty bold corner to overtake at. But that has not stopped lots of drivers and cars from doing it. So it's definitely going to be a corner to watch this year. And regardless of what the outcome is, I'm excited to have a front row seat for it all.
Yep. Just a couple more questions before we wrap things up here. HRC/Honda has to be looking at the World Endurance Championship now. I don't buy the F1 program taking up that much of the budget if Ferrari and Alpine of all manufacturers can run a dual program. I don't think that the budget is the real issue there. I think it's representation of the ARX06 on a global scale, where that car sort of has Acura branding with it. And there's not necessarily quite as much of a Honda tie-in with that car as there is Acura. But also we've talked in the past about the separation between, or at least the former separation that we had. Toyota is very similar as well, where Toyota stateside has TRD, and they were responsible for the NASCAR programs, the NHRA, the Lexus GT3 is TRD, and then Toyota Gazoo Racing Europe would be responsible for the World Rally Championship program. They were responsible for the hypercar program, obviously. And they're sort of separated as entities in the racing world. And then Honda, previously, of course, Honda Global focused on MotoGP. They focused on Formula One. And then HPD, as it used to be, was focused on the IndyCar side of things, sports car racing in the US. But we didn't see a ton of crossover between the two of them. In fact, only usually in GT3 is where we would see that carryover from the North American side to the global side. With that unification all under the HRC banner, one of my hopes has been that they would evaluate a program more seriously. But I haven't heard anything significant to this point, so I wouldn't expect them to be on the grid next year, but I guess we'll have to see beyond that, especially with the announcement that we'll be running under these regulations for another 5 seasons.
Yeah, I think, one of the things, quickly going back to that announcement about the regulations being extended for 5 seasons, it definitely does bring in, I think, more, maybe a better chance that we could see that Acura maybe make it to Le Mans at some point. But I also think that it increases the chance of maybe some customer programs emerging, maybe another manufacturer offering some customer cars, just because if they know that there is going to be a set period of time now, or an extended period of time where they can sell these cars, and these extensive networks that they have to set up to be able to properly support these additional customer entries. That was one of the things that popped into my mind, is I wonder if we could see a manufacturer that's been a little bit on the fence, maybe like a BMW, come forward and announce that they're going to offer some customer cars. Absolutely nothing confirmed on that front, but just a thought that crossed my mind.
Yep. And then last question here. What do you make of the possibility of the hypercar class in the Asian Le Mans series? This was something that was brought up recently, whether it was this morning or yesterday. It's all sort of a blur at this point. Um, as something that they're considering. Uh, to be honest with you, I'm a bit skeptical right now. It's going to come down to how much the manufacturers want to step up and do that. There definitely is, I think, a place for some more customer hypercar slash LMDH programs to be racing at this point in time, because we're seeing capacity grids in IMSA and the WEC at this point. So if you're a manufacturer like Porsche or Cadillac and you still want to sell more customer cars, but there's simply not enough room on the grids to do so in IMSA or the WEC, what do you do? And if you have teams that are interested in the Asian Le Mans series or the European Le Mans series, although I don't think the European Le Mans series was really mentioned in the same vein here, and you're interested in stepping up and paying that additional budget to run these hypercars, then why not? I think it would be an interesting space for it. The only thing is I don't necessarily see that happening, at least with the current breed of manufacturers that we have. I don't see that alignment of teams wanting to spend more money and then also manufacturers willing to provide more customer racing support than they currently are. Especially with the announcement that the LMP2 regulations are halted right now for stability and trying to keep costs low. It doesn't really sit in the same area as let's increase the budgets for some of these teams, but we'll see. It would be definitely interesting if it happened, but I'm holding a little skeptical for now.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with that.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we got enough for an episode here. We had a lot to cover, but next week we'll be back. We got another race recap episode. It's going over the 6 Hours at the Glen. And then I think everything starts to settle down a little bit. This was a very busy month for sports car racing news and races everywhere. But we'll be coming through this summer with some more IMSA races. We have the 6 Hours of Sao Paulo up next for the World Endurance Championship. And then, we're pretty much at the halfway point of the season for both championships, as crazy it is to say right now.
So, yeah, this is the halfway mark for IMSA, actually.
There you go.
This is the hump.
As we get closer to the championship deciding races, we'll be discussing those championships in much more detail. But until then, I want to thank everybody for tuning into another episode of this podcast. Hope to see you next week for another episode. Take care.